Hey guys, just an update on the electronics bench. So you can see behind me, it's all a big pile of junk at the moment. I have sort of dry fitted it together and have been working with the shelves and the workbench for a while now. But I want to finalise it and just get it all put together and everything sorted out. So there's a couple of things I'm doing today. I'm varnishing the wooden shelves, the plywood shelves. I'm also just finishing off the last piece on the frame, which I've actually just done. I'll show you that in a second. I'm installing the pegboard, and also I'll just show you this now. I recently got some anti-static matting from J-Car, which is an electronics store here. You can see this anti-static mat. It's conductive on the bottom there and static dissipative on the top. It's got the grounding snap for a wrist strap, and this one back here is my ground point. So I've actually made that cable, which I think just temporarily while I was moving the shelf I've put it over here. This is my random sort of cable holder thing. So you can see the two ends of it there. Basically what I did is I got a standard GPO outlet plug from the hardware store, and I've left the active and neutral pins, just nothing connected to them, and the earth pin has the anti-static, or it's the ground wire for the anti-static system. So that's the snap there. This actually includes the 1 mega ohm resistor, which is very important. You should read up about that if you're going to anti-static things yourself. You really need to have that resistor in line there. So that just clicks on the mat, and then I plug that into a standard wall socket, and that basically earths the whole system. So I'm going to take you outside now. Okay, so over here I have the shelving framework, which is made from that aluminium extrusion. The last piece I had to put in was that bottom piece there, so I've just put that in now. I ran out of aluminium, so I just went to the hardware store, I got another piece and put that piece in. So that's all ready now. You can see that's pretty sturdy. I can sort of pick it up and it holds its shape. It's pretty good, very cheap, very easy to snap together. And now what I've got on these sawhorses is the plywood that makes the shelves. So you can see here I've got these markings, and that's basically where the fluoros were installed. I've already dry fit them and they work nicely, so that's all figured out. So I've just removed them. I've actually got them sitting over here. You can see these two fluoros here, and you can see I've wired them here in series down to the power down there, and that all works. That's all nice. So I've just pulled the fluoros out so I could get access to unscrewing these here. So once I get those varnished and the shells varnished and sorted out, I'll reinstall the fluoros across here, and it should be good. So right now I'm going to get back to sanding. You see I've got a little sanding block going on here. I'm going to get back to sanding. I'm just going to sand all the edges, make it nice and neat. I'm using 120 grit at the moment, but once I get to varnishing I'll see if need be I'll run like a 240 grit between the coats and see how that goes. One other thing, I've got the pegboard here as well, which I did sort of install with just a few screws, but I'm going to install that permanently now. So that, if you have a look at my shelving here, you imagine this is the front of the desk. The pegboard's going to go on the back. So I've had it screwed in here previously. You can see a couple of screw holes. There's one there. I've marked out the other screw holes. I haven't actually drilled them yet, and obviously on this side as well. So I'll be installing that, and then that whole shelf unit will be sort of one piece: shelves, pegboard, the two fluoros, and then that'll just lift up and go straight in my bench. And as you can see, I've got these little aluminium brackets I made, so it just sits in there nice and tightly. Then I'll put my junk back on it. So I better get into it. So you can see I've just sort of lightly chamfered the edges a little bit. I don't want to take too much off because obviously the tab on that aluminium extrusion is holding those shelves up, but just enough so we don't knock off corners once it's all done and dusted. So I'm going to clean all that sawdust or sanding sort of dust off of here, and then break out the varnish. Okay, so this is what I'm using. It's Cabothane Clear, so it's a clear polyurethane for doors, windows, trim, furniture, etc. And I've just had a look at the directions, surface preparation here, and it's going to be hard to see there, but I'll just read it. It says for bare exterior or interior timber, sand surface using 180 to 240 grit sandpaper. So I've just used 120 grit sandpaper, but I do have, you might be able to see in there, this is 240 grit. So I'm going to do one more pass with this finer grain sandpaper, and then we'll be ready to apply the polyurethane. Now, one thing I've learnt just building this shelf system here is that it's probably not a good idea to use a biro or an ink pen to do your markings. I mean, these don't really matter because the fluoro sits over them anyways, but I've been sanding this for a long time and it just doesn't come out really because it seems like the ink soaks into the wood grain. So, I mean, it's not really a problem here, but I think in future, stick with a pencil. I think it's the best way to go. You can see I've got some ink over here. Some little bits of ink around the place. This is going to be underneath the shelf, so it doesn't really matter. And look, it's just a shelf anyways, it's not a display piece, but just a thought. Okay, so instructions are to stir, not shake. Apply a coat with the grain, with the brush. We're using a quality brush. Well, I'm using this crappy cheap brush, but it's going to have to do. And then it says if the grain starts sticking up, which sometimes happens with painting or varnishing, just lightly sand with 240 grit paper and then apply a second, third coat 2 hours apart, sort of thing. So I'm going to get started on the first coat now. I've just got a bit of scrap wood here. I'm hoping it's going to be alright to stir with. Probably a bit big. Okay, so this is the first coat. It's now been an hour and a half and this is all pretty much dry. I've had them out in the sun here and I've also flipped them over part way, so they're looking pretty good. They are feeling a little bit rough though, and it did say in the instructions if it did sort of get the little fibres sticking up, you can just lightly sand it with some 240 grit. So I'm going to do that now and then put the next coat on, and I'm hoping with a thick enough coat that'll be it. I don't think I'm going to have to go for a third coat, but we'll see. So hopefully I can get this done today and get them sort of touch dry and then put the thing back together. I've just finished the second coat and I've got it out here in the sun drying. I've done both sides, it was touch dry, so I flipped it over, did the other side, and if you can see in the reflection there, I think I've got a pretty even coat on there. It's pretty thick, you can still see the wood grain through it, but it's definitely sealed it up nicely. So I'm going to let that dry. We've still got a couple of hours of daylight, so that should dry up nicely. Shelf is there waiting to be put back together. The only other thing I've got to do is, obviously I've got to screw the floors back in, but also on the bench itself I need to tidy all this up. I've got a bunch of plastic tubs and storage organisation ideas I'm going to implement now, but after I've got all of this off the desk and sorted out, if I have a look under the anti-static mat here, you might be able to see this. And that was from playing with matches. So I've chipped out all the charred stuff and sort of cleaned it out. I've used this brush to sort of get all the stuff out of there, so we have a good surface for the putty here to adhere to. So I'm going to fill that, let it dry, and then we'll sand over the top and just make sure that it's nice and flush, nice and flat, and then we can put the bench mat back on, the anti-static mat back over, and put the rest of the thing back together. Alright, not the neatest job in the world, but I never said I was a putty expert. So I've used this to fill that scorch mark that I've sort of dug out of there and cleaned up. So I used just like a paint scraper, sort of a putty blade, and applied that, and it says it's got 2 hours to dry, so it's already started to sort of dry around the edges, you can see there. So I'm going to let that sit for 2 hours, and then I'm going to come back with my 240 grit, or I've got some 180 grit as well, but this should do it, I think, if it doesn't clog up. My little sanding block here, and I'll just sand it over so it's all nice and smooth, and then I can lay my anti-static mat back down. So that hopefully will turn out nicely. Obviously the colour doesn't match, but it's under a mat, it's a workbench, meh. Okay, I've just had an idea of something I can do while I'm waiting for the putty and the polyurethane varnish to dry on the shelving. I've got a bunch of these drawers, I'll show you these now. See those drawers down there that are used for holding components and bits and pieces? So I've got a couple of these already, and I've got another one packed away. And I was thinking it'd be really handy, because I was trying to think where I could put them, and I thought it'd be handy to put them over here. So behind this door you can see I've got a decent sort of a space where the door can still open like that, and it's sort of got this area here. So what I was thinking is I could just take this sort of like junk off of here and the key rack and everything, and it's already got this piece of particle board or chipboard that I could use as the backing plate for these things, and then actually wall mount them. Just to give you a bit of an idea of how this is orientated, so my workbench, electronics workbench, is going to be over here. and here's a doorway. Behind the door, that's where I'm thinking of putting those component trays or the component shelving. I'm going to leave this here because that's what I use to hold the door open. Just wrap that around the door handle. It's my high-tech little door opener, so I'll work around that, I think. I might have to move it, but in case you're wondering, that's what it's for. I think I just use these sort of chipboard screws. This looks like it's only maybe 18 millimeters thick. So this will go in and it won't go past the chipboard. But it does have this sort of countersunk head, but that'll be good enough because these have like a keying system, so if I leave them sort of sticking out a little bit, I can sort of like drop it into place, so I'll use those. Alright, packed everything up and I can't find anything now, I just need to find a Nico or something. Alright, that's not too bad. And actually I think that's the only two mounting screws, so I guess that's it. Yeah. There's no other screw holes. I might, just for my own sanity, just put a couple more down the bottom. I think this is pretty thin sheet metal, so I can just push it straight through. Just in case, because if I bump that and one dislodges, I'm going to lose everything. So I might just lock it in place. Sweet, two more to go. So you can see that's what we ended up with. Let me just get out of the light there. So we've got this one level with the bottom, this one level with the top. We've got a little shelf in the middle. They're all locked in with those extra screws that I drilled in the bottom, two in the bottom of these and one in the bottom of these two, so they can't be like bumped upwards and thrown off their key fixings. So that's all good. And now for the big test, let's see if the door can still open and make some clearance. So if I open this door, nice, and then I just lock the handle here with the shoestring. Here we go. There we go, nice. So if I'm working at my bench here, I can just spin around. Usually this door is shut, and then access all my components there. And I've got some extra space down here, so I could even fit a big one like that. Because the two mounting holes are at the top, I could screw it on the chipboard there and hang it lower, but I can also get these little mini ones and perhaps block a few of those in if I need to expand. So it's all good. That was easy. Okay, so these have been out in the sun for an hour and a half, almost 2 hours, and the second coat's dry, and what I'm going to do now is put the fluoros back on and start putting the whole shelf back together on the frame, and I'll show you that. You can see that's it. Got these nicely protected and varnished shelving, top and bottom. There's our lights under there, pegboard at the back, and that is ready to mount back on the bench. The Aten 858D Plus hot air gun, usage number 729. Drying putty. Alrighty, so that's been patched up. Doesn't look too pretty, but that's alright. It's going to be under the anti-static mat. So I'm going to throw that on now. You see I actually had to cut it down this edge here. I just used a Stanley knife and then rounded the corners with some scissors so they matched this side here. So that mat will go like this. And then the shelving will sort of pin these bits down here. The little brackets at the back no longer fit because of the pegboard, so I'm just going to remove those. The front one should be enough. I might zip tie around or something. I'll figure that out later. But for now, those are going to go. That's the little bracket there. That was just sort of capturing the corner of the shelf. Still trying to figure out how to stop this from curling up. I might have to put some double-sided tape. I really don't need, but I'll see how it goes. It's really only a problem here because I've got all the gear at the back to hold that down. I'll plug this light in. I just wanted to quickly show you guys something I made here. I made this last week, but I thought it would be worth showing you. It's sort of to do with the workbench. It's a little aluminium bracket, and I've just cut up some piece of aluminium. I used epoxy adhesive, Araldite is the brand, and you see I've got some little marks here on the shelf, and this here just slides pretty firmly into place like that. So you can see that there. Now what I use that for is, if I'm going to do any video of the bench here, sometimes it's easier for me to have my main camera set up somewhere and I can use my phone here, and see I've got a dot there. I just aim the lens with the dot, put the phone like that, and that's lined up nicely. So if I hit the record button, for example, I can have that recording, and you know, if I just throw something on the bench, you can sort of see. That's how I can sort of film my sort of bench top activity, and that's how it sits. Just thought that was a nifty little trick, and it sort of clicks in nicely there. I can sort of move it around, slide it on these rails, or move it higher if need be. But yeah, that's how I achieve that camera angle.